So we'll get started. Welcome. My name is Joe Swimmer. I'm the Executive Director of Episcopal Parish Network, and we are so pleased to have you with us today for this workshop being presented by Building for Mission. Really excited to have them share about volunteer engagement and leadership growth for laity and clergy and some of the models that you might think about in this work. It's going to be wonderful to hear from Natalie and Tamika, and I'm grateful for you taking time out of your day to join us. Please remember to use the chat to put your questions and your comments into. And also, we'd ask that if you wouldn't mind putting where you're dialing in from, your name and where you're dialing in from into the chat, that would be terrific. Give our presenters a sense of who is in the audience today. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Natalie and Tamika. Thank them for joining us. Thank you for joining us, and remind you that we will have several more webinars this month that we are sending out emails about, and we look forward to welcoming you to those digital workshops sometime in the near term. Handing it off to Tamika and Natalie. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Joe. I am Tamika, and I have the pleasure of leading Building for Mission. Our vision is that every organization would be effective at building thriving multicultural teams at every level. And you can see here on the slide some of the areas of our expertise and the services we offer. But I would say further, as a person of faith, I really believe that the church can be an example to having effective, engaged teams, which is why I'm so excited about our session today. A little bit about us. For me personally, my educational background is in systems engineering. My professional background extends across multiple industries, but I spent probably about 12 years in a youth workforce development program leading organization development. And that was exciting because the organization grew from 50 to over 900 in about 12 years. And now I have the pleasure of leading BFM, and we have been around for about 8 years as an organization. I am a girl mom. I have 3 teenage girls. I have a fantastic husband. I have one COVID dog who's, got some emotional and behavioral issues, but we do love him. And I also have the pleasure of living with my sister, my niece, and my nephew. So we have a very full house over here in the Northern Virginia area. Lastly, I would just say that my community engagement has been over 25 years in ministry, starting with college ministry, and now I pastor with my husband a multicultural church here in Virginia. And we're so excited. So I'm going to pass to my colleague, Natalie, to share a little bit about herself, and then we'll kind of get into our content for today.
Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Natalie Thomas. I'm joining y'all from Massachusetts, and I come to this work of Building for Mission really through 3 different strands. I have had roles in executive leadership, both in the nonprofit world and then also working for Episcopal nonprofits in the Diocese of Massachusetts. My leadership background is originally in community organizing, so I have a real heart for social justice and also participatory leadership. And then I really learned how to be a leader, and the leadership models that I was most inspired from are from my experience in faith communities. I grew up in Texas. I came to the Episcopal Church in Austin, and soon after that was part of an Episcopal Service Corps program, and I'm a deacon in the diocese. And like Tamika, I really believe that the church can be a model of what it looks like, not just to do good or to be about spreading the love of Christ out in the world, but also can create structures that do that internally. And that's really what we're about at Building for Mission, is supporting organizations to have values aligned work internally and externally. And I live in Massachusetts with my spouse, James, who's also a deacon, and our 2 children, Phoebe and Stephen, aptly named, who are 3 and 1 years old. And I also have put in the chat a participant guide. When you open that, it will invite you to make a copy of it. We'll be referencing it throughout the session, and there are some, tools you can take with you too on it. So you might want to make a copy of that. Yeah, thank you. Krista. Not original, but beautiful. Yeah. So we will go into the agenda for today. So today, our hope is that we take a fresh look at volunteer teams. We all know that we say this all the time: the church is changing, the church is changing. But that also means that we need to think about not just what ministry looks like, but also what the structures and systems look like that make that ministry possible and how they might change. And so we're going to talk a little bit about challenges for teams, specifically in the faith context. And then we'll go over a few best practices for designing and activating high performing teams. These could work in any context, but we're especially looking at the church today. And there's even a few places where you can use your participant guide to get experience with one tool that we're going to be sharing. And we've started off with some introductions. We're going to move into some theological grounding that really looks at teamwork as an example of discipleship. And then, yes, I see you, Jennifer. Here you go. Then we'll go into our best practices. And we're trying to save 10 to 15 minutes at the end for questions and answers. Well, first, I'm not sure who's here, if anyone's from the Diocese of Massachusetts, but if they have ever worked with me, they are going to be saying, of course, Natalie is starting with the Book of Common Prayer, the mission of the church. And the reason I start this is because no matter what we're doing in the church, we really want to ground it in the purpose of why we exist and what makes us special, what we're called to do. And the Book of Common Prayer, this is page 855, says that the mission of the church is to restore all people to unity with God and each other in Christ. And so in this place of living in this world in which we are so often divided from ourselves, one another, God, creation, that the church is a conduit for coming back into relationship with ourselves, with one another, with God, through Christ. With the world around us. And so that happens in many ways, right? That happens in our work in the world. A few ways that we do that is through evangelism, witness to justice, showing up and advocating for God's dream in the world, and also the healing ministries, the feeding ministries, the serving ministries the church is part of. It also needs to and can happen in the church, right? We come back into relationship with Christ through worship, the Eucharist, through fellowship, and also through committee and team participation. And all of that is discipleship, right? This idea that we are learning how Jesus lived in the world and we're building the skills and tools to follow Christ. You may not think of volunteering on teams and committees as discipleship. You might think of it as a chore. But if we're really mindful about how we structure teams and how we think of engaging people on those teams, we believe, and I have experienced in my service in the church, that teams can be a really life-giving opportunity for people. And they will continue to say yes if we can be mindful of making sure that these teams are an opportunity for people really to have a deeper understanding of the church's mission and why these different teams move the church's mission forward or support the participation in God's mission in the world, how they strengthen your individual gifts for the use of God's dream. So how my skills and gifts get stronger through participating in teams so that I can participate in God's dream in the world. And at our best, the teams themselves are an experience of unity and relationship. How good and pleasant it is, right, to dwell in unity, that we can walk away from our participation on a committee and say, that was an experience of church. And that was an experience of me getting to know God better. And I feel more like myself after participating in that team, whether that's vestry or altar guild or a community engagement team or stewardship campaign, that these are all experiences of me understanding and coming to know who Christ has called me to be. And that is really the foundation for all of this work, is that we hope that in applying these tools, we will be becoming more of the church that we might be if we fully live into the vision that Christ had for us.
I'm going to talk a little bit about the challenges that are common to building teams within the church. And this is actually a good opportunity for you to pull out your participant packet. There will be a couple of prompt questions as you go along, if you want to think about it as you go along. And we'd love for this to be a little bit interactive. So we know you have access to the chat. So as I walk through some of these 5 common challenges, put a little what do you call it? Exclamation point. When something resonates with you, you can say why it resonates with you. Or if you have an example of how this shows up in your congregation, you can put a little plus. and share what the example is, or just anything. If there's a question that you want to ask as we go along, we should have some time at the end to answer some questions. But one of the common challenges that we have with building teams is just we're functioning on repeat. The teams that we have in place are the same teams we've always had in place, and we're really working hard to try to encourage volunteers to join those teams. But we might miss a step because times are changing all the time. I know even within our church, when we think about the needs of our community post-COVID, it's very different. So every so often, even every year, we should be thinking about what are the needs of our community right now, even outside of the church? What are some of the needs within our church? And how clear are we? How can we prioritize those needs and really base our teams based on those needs? The second common challenge is outdated structures. And that really just speaks to not thinking about, do we really need this team? Do we really need this many people on this particular team? Given we have this new need within our organization, how can we think about forming a team around meeting that need of parents, or we call us a lot of singles, or in between, the grown folks? How do we think about some of their needs within the church? Another common challenge is the numbers don't match the need. And it could be that we just can't solicit enough volunteers, or, we have a lot of people on one particular team or ministry, but there's a much greater need when it comes to discipleship groups and Bible study groups. So we really want to think about making sure that we are encouraging and stewarding our volunteer teams and our ministry teams towards the highest need within our communities. Another challenge is difficulty to really challenge volunteer members. Sometimes we don't really have great systems for holding people accountable to their own commitments. And we can either be too brusque or be a little bit passive aggressive. And so just what are some of the strategies we can use within the church to make sure people are clear on what they're signing up for, and to have ways that we one-on-one and within the team kind of check in on our progress and the commitments that we've made. And then lastly, oftentimes there's a challenge with relationships, and there's a need for more relational capacity. And there could be some conflict going on within a team, and because we don't navigate that conflict well, we're really not able to function effectively. So decisions aren't being made in a timely way. People aren't given the right levels of responsibility because of that conflict or conflict avoidance that's happening within the organization and the church. So I'm not sure if any of these resonate with you. I'm sure there's a number of you that are like, there's something on this list that resonates, but we're going to talk a little bit about some high-level best practices that we can do to really navigate some of these common challenges. The first, surprise, surprise, is really just taking a step back with your team. It could be with your vestry, it could be with an ad hoc group of members that you bring together to really talk about, what are we noticing around the demographics that are changing in our community? What are we noticing about some of the needs within our community? And this is even beyond the church walls. Like, what are we noticing about the needs of our broader community? What are we noticing about some of the needs of people within our own congregations? And then think about prioritizing that list. Like, if there were areas where we could provide support based on these needs, what would that be? And how would we prioritize what's most important, second level most important, et cetera? And then once you do that, really think about and list all the teams that you already have, the ministries that you already have in place, and think about where are there opportunities to either form new teams to meet needs that some of our current teams aren't fully addressing, maybe combine teams, potentially reduce the number of teams and say, you know what, we actually don't need this ministry in this way anymore, or we don't need 5 people on this ministry. But just really looking at the current team structure connected to the prioritization. And then lastly, thinking about the capacity for within your church congregation, we are in groups that are different sizes, and it's okay to have a conversation with your team and say, you know what, we know that all 5 of these things are a huge need, but we really only have the capacity to do 3 well. So let's really focus on those 3 really well, grow our membership, grow our engagement, and then maybe next year or in 6 months, we can revisit taking on these other 2 priorities. So something to consider as you're thinking about really assessing your current team structure. And then lastly, we want to talk about, you've done that process, you've maybe combined teams, you've maybe created new teams, you kind of have a clear sense of like, these are the right teams based upon the needs in our community and our church. You know, how do we create a little bit of structure and some guidelines to help our ministries function well? We have 3 big buckets that could be super helpful for every team to have. And the first is just, what's the purpose? In one sentence, how can we communicate and share the role of that team and how it connects to the needs in the community and your church, how it brings people in to discipleship? And then think a little bit about, you know, who do we have within our church congregation that could help us achieve getting this done, could accomplish. Maybe they're already on the team, maybe they're not on the team, but really taking a good look of around the skills and the capacity that you have within your congregation to really support that particular team's purpose. And then within the capacity of that group, thinking about, if we could do 100 different things, what are the activities that we really want to focus on? And it may be 10 things that we want to focus on, or 5 things we want to focus on that are going to leverage the skills and the gifts within that team, but really help meet the highest priority needs within the ministry. So I'm going to pass to Natalie to talk a little bit more about some best practices that you can implement within a team setting to help it be effective as the ministry is working together.
Thanks. And I'm just aware that it may be too that even that very first step of setting priorities and making sure they're clearly communicated might be new to folks. So if that is, just make a note of it and we can come back to that during the Q&A. We just wanted to go over these kind of broad strokes of start with priorities and make sure all of the team's purposes really align to those priorities. I like to think about these team expectation statements. That if the expectation statements were read by newcomers, they would know what the teams are doing, right? It builds transparency and connection across the congregation. It may not be clear to a new person what an altar guild team does, you know, and having some language around it can be really helpful. And then once you have that language, you can start to delegate responsibility within a team. So I already saw this come up earlier, and there was something about this came up earlier in the chat, which is around administrative responsibility. I think administrative responsibility falls into this bucket, but often just does any general big pieces of responsibility that if we haven't taken the time to really carve out roles that have clear responsibilities and clear actions associated with them, often the teams can kind of get stuck. And then being on that team can feel tiring. And it also can feel, if you're the leader of the church or the congregation, it can feel like you are still doing the work, even though you formed a team. And so there's an essential part after you have that team expectation statement, right? Then there's some notes about it in your guide about making sure that what is clear in that expectation statement. Then you can start to think about, how do I develop roles, right, that actually move us towards that statement. And so I wanted to do this exercise with everybody, and you can engage in the chat in this, but I'm going to talk through it. And that if we had a team in our congregation or in a parachurch ministry that said, we're going to build a community engagement team, and the community engagement team is working with church members and local community leaders to pursue healing and justice through Christ. So let's first just look at that statement. First, that says what the goal of the team is, pretty simply. It is, healing and justice ministries. It connects it to the church's ministry. clearly, because it's about, what the church is doing to be about the work of Christ in the world. And then it also is clear about who's on it, church members and local community leaders. So once you have that statement, then you can start thinking about what are the roles. And you'll notice that the place we start with roles is actually what must happen for this team to be successful. So we don't start with, I have a team, who are the 5 people that can get on it? When that happens, we often end up replicating this 80-20 percentage that is often talked about, because the people you think to be on the team with are the people you have relationship with. That's normal, and that's totally understandable, because we want to tap the people that we trust. We want to tap the people that we know that are engaged. And that means that we kind of go to those same people first in our mind. So we're suggesting, instead of starting with the people, once you have the team formed, start with what needs to happen. So in this situation, what would a community engagement team need to do to be successful at this ministry of working with church members and local community leaders to pursue healing and justice through Christ? Well, one of the things here are some ideas of what it's going to need to do. They're going to have to build relationships with local organizations. They're going to need to recruit church members to participate in these activities. And you might say, we're going to do some new activities. Let's have some theological teaching, maybe a Sunday formation about why we do community engagement. So this is really rooted in the gospel. Again, when you start with those building blocks of what needs to happen, then you eventually you're going to be thinking about who do we know is really good in relationship building? Who do we know doesn't have a hard time asking people to get involved, or who might actually have some teaching and some formation that they can share? Once you start with those 3 functions, then you're going to move on to this question about authority. And you're asking yourself, given that function, what authority is needed for that role? So for the relationship building, it actually is the decision that this person is going to make to enter into partnerships with organizations. When you write that down, you might think, wow, I really need to have someone involved there who I know is going to, come to the staff or come to the central leadership to ask about, is this a good partnership, or who really knows our values and our criteria? You might actually even choose to put a staff member on this team if it's going to have a really significant amount of authority and responsibility connected to it. And then, who's going to be recruiting church members? That's not as many decisions. You're going to be asking people to get involved. And the reason you take this step of looking at the authority is you can think very strategically about who's on that team, because again, often what happens if you have teams that don't have someone who has the decision-making authority, or they don't know who to go to in that situation, the team can just spin its wheels and they can get stuck in this not making a decision. And that can be tiring for the team members. It can also be tiring for the church. And so you want to take care when you're building the team to think really clearly about what decisions are going to be made and what authority is needed for the team to work. Then after that, you can think about what sort of tasks and responsibilities it should say would be associated with this role, not just this team, but this role. So in specific, with this first person building relationships with local organizations, they're going to need to be doing relationship building, community mapping, potentially an equity analysis to make sure that different types of community members are involved, that the people are involved represent the demographics of the community. And so again, that's going to help you answer this last question of who would be a good fit for this role, given their gifts and what we need as a team. And then once you've drafted that out for all the different roles, you can start thinking about who the members on that team would be. And to what was said about the administrative work, we don't have this on here, but almost every team that we work with has a role called coordinator or administrative support. And that is a big responsibility, but what we have found is it can be very helpful to delegate that role of the admin to one specific person, or again, that ends up falling back to the staff or just kind of getting spread all around, and then things can get stuck. And not move forward. So this is something that you can do as you're forming teams. You can also take a pause with all the different teams you have at your organization or your church, and actually go through and set these statements up for all of them, and then do the role exercises. Obviously, it's tender to think about moving people around, but you really want to again make sure that people are in roles that they're really thriving in and are aligned with their gifts. And also, when you have this, as you welcome new people into the church, and you're welcoming new people into the teams, they have a sense of what the team's about, and they can have a choice to participate and really know what roles they're signing up for. And great. Okay. If you have any questions, you can put them in the chat. Otherwise, we'll get to them at the end. And then, in addition to doing the roles and delegating responsibility, another best practice is to fully cultivate leaders in everything that you're doing. So we're not just asking people to take a position or to come to a meeting, but really to lead the work alongside of you. And what we have found is that when we do full on leadership cultivation with the teams that we work with, you can have smaller teams because people are more involved and they have these designated roles and they have more authority. And so you don't need as many people to do less things when you're really thinking about having leaders, not just bodies on the team. And the three suggestions that we have for making sure that you are cultivating leaders in every team that you have is first is to really engage the person in the work of co-creation. We know from the Psalms that God is a co-creative God and is inviting us into the work of co-creation alongside God. And we want to do that with our team members too. And so what that looks like is that we're not inviting people just to do a function, but we're inviting people to really be in the creative work alongside with us. And so someone said earlier that one of the challenges is that there are older members who are less involved and younger members are less interested in the roles. Well, part of that, I mean, there are a lot of reasons that could be, so I don't want to diagnose it too simply. But one of the things is that often we just ask people to do what someone else used to do instead of really engaging their gifts and their creativity, that maybe things are going to shift when they say yes and come on board. And so this work of engaging people, inviting people into the creative work that you're doing of ministry is so essential in terms of running effective teams at the church. Of course, not everyone comes with the skills and knowledge. So, either as a staff person or as a warden, a vestry member, you really need to see ourselves as coaches in this. And so, we are making sure people have the tools they need. We're offering support at the beginning of a vestry tenure, at the beginning of a fellowship or a stewardship campaign tenure. You might actually do some coaching and skill building for that team so that people have the skills that they need to do the work. And you might offer either one person, some dioceses have coaches that can work with you, or you might offer one coach that can support all the different parishioners, or as the priest or deacon or other staff member. You might have office hours that people can drop into, but really building a culture of learning and coaching. And over again, remember we said at the beginning that the team should be an experience of growing in your gifts, that people are getting the skills and knowledge and feel like they've learned through being on the team. And then lastly is recruitment. And this means the team members are doing recruitment. And this is another good way of getting away from the 80-20 usual suspects, is that when we ask people to be on a team, part of the responsibility that we associate with joining that team is going to be that they are taking responsibility for recruiting new members to join the team. And so when you are coming onto the team, part of it is that you're going to fill your role. And so you're thinking about throughout the whole, if your tenure's 3 years or 2 years or 1 year, you're thinking about who might be a good replacement for you. And it ideally should be someone who hasn't served on the team in the past, definitely not somebody who is serving on it in the moment. And again, this might require some coaching and support, but that also gets the work of recruitment out of the leaderships, and it distributes that leadership and responsibility through the team. And another best practice we have is collaboration. When you get to the point, and I've seen this in the chat a few times, but when you get to the point where you just truly do not have the members to fill the bodies that we need, a really, good option to think about is what it would it look like to collaborate with another church. What might it look like to collaborate with another, another Episcopal church, interdenominational collaboration on a ministry? So if in our work, we've been supporting two Episcopal churches that are they're not merging. I shouldn't say that they're collaborating. They're in a collaboration right now. And a part of that is to start thinking about, what does a shared worship team look like? What does a shared stewardship or engagement team look like? What does a shared service team look like? And if you get to this place where you really start to say, we can't fill these roles, it might be time for an honest conversation, not of just continuing to tap the same members, but to say, who might we be able to work with? And when you work with other people and you have these conversations around collaboration and shift, then you can open up to being able to do new things. So, for example, in this ministry that this collaboration I was just talking about, they wanted to have a more contemporary service. They wanted to have something that was more accessible to families, but neither church was willing to let go of the traditional service. But in the collaboration, they're able to keep the traditional service and then also have the creative service. So now that the two churches together are having two different types of services, and members have these options to going to both, and they're working collectively to do this and sharing their resources and sharing their people to make this happen. And so that's just a really practical example of how, when you collaboration, 1 + 1 can equal 3, right? And not just 1 + 1 = 2. So we are actually at a time to pause, and I see some questions in the chat. It would be really helpful. I am appreciating, Jim, that you are sharing this specific example. If other people have specific examples you want feedback on, we're happy to. We can also go back to different slides. We know you can't come off mute, but if you have specific questions about a tool or something that we referenced, we can move the slides back too. And we say, Jim says, we have a really large church, 60 ministries and committees. How many are too many? Do you have a process for rationalizing the committees and ministries to ensure there are enough volunteers and leaders as well as resources? How do you do oversight of each ministry or committee, e.g., does the vestry actively oversee the ministries and committees? Tamika, do you want to start with that? And then, yeah, since I've been talking, you might have, yeah. Like,
Oh my
your
gosh.
brain is fresher than mine, but I can jump in too. Yeah.
Yeah, how many are too many? It really depends on the effectiveness and the impact, that each committee is wanting and needing to have. And so I do think that when evaluating all of the individual teams, it's helpful to revisit what's the purpose of each one of these teams with the team leads or a small group of folks within those teams, and really trying to understand, are we having the impact that we want and we need to have? What are some of the challenges that we have? And really through those conversations within each of the teams, you'll have a better sense of, are we right on track? Should we combine efforts? And or, maybe this isn't, maybe this team really should kind of retire, its work. So that's the recommendation I would give in regard to, answering the question, is this too many? How do we know? How do we assess? Let me see, there's other parts to that question.
I have a comment about the oversight. I can
Yes.
come in for that, for the oversight about each ministry or committee. So I don't know, Jim, because I'm curious if y'all have bucketed your groups and committees. So it might be helpful, in this activity of purpose for a large church, for purpose, people and activities, just with purpose, to start by saying, is this a church that's furthering, is this a ministry that's furthering the church's ability to evangelize, to do worship, to do fellowship, to do Bible study information, right? Like, bracket them off into these groups of the aspects of the Christian life, just so you can start this assessment that Tamika's talking about of, like, where is there duplication of efforts? where really could people be collaborating, internal collaboration, I mean, in this instance. And then in terms of oversight, I am a proponent for almost, we call it the snowflake model, which is where the vestry has little groups has people who are responsible for different groups. I don't know if that necessarily means that the vestry specifically is overseeing all 60, but it could be that the vestry, say one vestry member has a team of 3 or 4 fellowship folks who are also overseeing other fellowship ministries. So there's coordination, right? And that in that you have, so maybe I can draw this and not, if you have one person who's on the vestry right here, this is very small, but you see that one person, then they're working with, 3 different fellowship ministries. And then it might even be that these fellowship ministries break off if you're in a really big team and you have other ones here too. And so this person isn't necessarily working with all of the different fellowship ministries, but they do have a really good sense of, what fellowship ministries are active, where is there opportunity for people to work better together, because there does need to be some centralized stewardship of resources and time, because without it, you can just be allocating the same, like you're saying about budget. The budget can be allocated in ways that doesn't necessarily actually align with the ministries that you want. And then I would go back to what Tamika said at the beginning. Ultimately, the question is just, are we achieving our mission as a church? And are we growing? Is the ministry deepening? Are people coming to know Christ on a deeper level? If that's true, great, but where are those in the participant guide? You see there's a place to list your church's priorities and then list your teams. And if there are things that don't line up, it may be that it's time for the team to be dissolved, not necessarily because it's doing any harm, but just that it's really not stewarding these priorities, right? And so then in that case, it might be time to unform it and to use the resources elsewhere. I hope that's helpful, those thoughts.
Yep, and I see Jim has added each vestry member is a liaison to key ministries and committees. And you also ask for monthly brief reports to the vestry from all the ministry and committees. So we really appreciate that add, Jim. There's another question, a practical question about kind of the administrative load of ministries by Krista. And there was another, and this connects to a question earlier about a smaller church that kind of has the same challenge of the administrative load. And so more specifically, in your work, you've seen churches save time on scheduling and communicating volunteers, which really matters when leaders want to focus on relationships and ministry instead of the admin tasks. Reply all emails and spreadsheets. And so your question for the group, and I'm sure a lot of people are interested in this, what strategies have we seen that reduces the admin load of organizing volunteers, especially when staff is small? And so again, there's 100+ people on this call. So if you have strategies, feel free to put it in the chat and we will lift them up. And I also think, I'll pass it to you, Natalie, to say, a few strategies as well.
Yeah, I think, this is one of the ways where almost that image I was just showing to Jim can be really helpful, or this chart can be really helpful, because there can be people who are responsible for coordinating. So if you are throwing, let's say you have a church that I used to serve at has something that they call Summerfest, and it just happened, and it's a huge outdoor summer party. And one of the responsibilities is actually coordinating the volunteers that run that party and getting people to sign up, or to have, a fundraiser concert series or something like that. And yes, the admin work of just getting people to sign up and making sure they show up on time is a big load. As opposed to keeping it centralized in a staffing function, I think that that's something that we can hand over to teams in terms of recruiting, making sure people show up, doing the follow-up work. And that, feels risky. It even feels risky as I'm saying it out loud, but it's a good test to the members of the congregation to say, if this is something that we really want to see happen, let's make it happen. And so it's a little bit of an old school way of doing the administrative work, but I think person to person accountability, calling people, asking people to sign up that way, not one centralized person, but distributing that around the team can actually build relationships in the church and can lead to more effectiveness of the and involvement and engagement, and also just gets feedback. We just did at the church that I'm currently part of right now. We just did a survey for young families about the ministries that we're doing, and I had to email. I and my co-coordinator emailed people to say, "Have you filled it out?" And it gave us real life feedback about some of the survey, right? And what was working and what wasn't working. And so reinstituting that relational component to this teamwork structure can actually support the improvement of teams real life. So yes, and like Krista, I am a lover of a good spreadsheet. So I also endorse all use of Google tools for shared work, shared spreadsheets. Google Forms can be really helpful for people who editing spreadsheets are not as easy. A Google form can be a good admin. So yes, all the admin tasks, and then the relational aspect as well, I would say.
And use technology. So there are a couple of ads in the chat around MSP, Ministry Scheduler Pro, that helps with some of the admin pieces if, budget wise, that's available to you. Here's another question, Natalie. A challenge we're having is that as parishioners are getting older and wanting to step back from volunteering, the generations after them do not have the time and capacity to fill those vacated volunteer spots. So what are some things that we can do? And I can start with an idea. And, when it seems like you need more volunteers and it's some of the folks you're asking, can't volunteer, it might be time to just take a step back and pull some of those folks together and talk a little bit about what are some of their needs? What do they value that the church offers? Because it might be that they're not willing to volunteer for X ministry opportunities because it's not really connected to their day-to-day lives, some of the core needs that they have, but some of the other needs they have might give birth to needs within your church community, the broader community that we don't realize. And it kind of gives us insight around how to unform and reform. And it could also re-energize people to volunteer because people are spending their time somewhere. And so as we get a better sense of where they're spending their time, it gives us a better sense of where their needs are and that support. I remember when I was leading kids ministry and, our whole pitch was every parent should be volunteering, like if we have every parent volunteering and on this schedule, it gives all of us a break because we can rotate our time. And so just really thinking about starting with that group and trying to get a better sense of what their needs are and seeing if that shifts kind of how you're thinking about teams and needs. Is there any other ideas you want to add to that, Natalie, before I go to the next question?
Yeah, what I would say about that is that sometimes there is a grief process in as churches change and as the people who are involved in churches change, that the ministries change too. And there are, I think there are generational shifts about what expectations are in church leadership. I'm talking about lay members of the church, and also to what Tamika just said about what people want to be involved in. And so at times, there is a real grieving process when it gets time to hand over something that someone isn't ready to pick it up. And it may be that needs to be fallow in your church for a little bit until you understand, you can really reconnect it to the purpose. What I would say is if you really believe that a ministry is vital and necessary to your community, to go back to that slide that we have on connecting the team to the priorities of the church, and to be able to articulate as a leader, whether you're a vestry person or you're a staff person, to be able to say in front of the staff, in front of the congregation, we really need this team because it's enabling us to do this work, which we've named as a priority. And when you're able to do that, then you can actually invite people into the ministry on a real like grounded commitment to these priorities that you've set forth. And I pulled up this slide because recruitment doesn't need to happen, and I would say shouldn't happen. I don't love using that shouldn't word, but is best when it doesn't happen at the end of someone's tenure. So we really want to be recruiting people to join the teams way before we're signing off and engaging them in co-creating the ministry. That way it's changing. So I've worked with a church before, a while ago, that had a ministry to unhoused folks that was really run by one person, and there were some particularities about how that person ran it that just were particular to her and to her incredible love for the world. And when she was ready to retire from that ministry, it was a volunteer, but she was unwilling to pass it on unless it looked exactly the same, right? And so the alternative is not then the good answer is not waiting for someone who just is going to fill the shoes of the person who's leaving, but instead inviting people into the ministry earlier, letting the ministry change in its iterations, and then there's a new crop of people who are going to be leading it. So think about team growth and cultivation of leadership way before it's time for people to sign off the teams. um, and then also sometimes it does have to be fallow for the ministry to regrow.
I appreciate that response because it also speaks to a question that was shared earlier in the chat around how to help volunteers identify and prepare successors. So your guidance around building a team and sharing responsibility early on, way before there's a transition, really speaks to that. Someone did ask a question around someone in their church suggesting written job descriptions, but they for every specific person volunteer, and that seems a little bit corporate or overly corporate, and what our thoughts are. And our thoughts generally would be probably yes. However, within the context of what we shared before, we use a lot of team charters where there's like a team purpose, and within that team there's individual roles that teams can play, or individuals can play on that team, and there's clear commitments that the team is agreeing to, making norms that the team is agreeing to, clear checkpoints where people can check in on accountability or progress. And so that can help versus having a specific job description for every volunteer role. But within that team charter, you can have a few bullets that really do speak to what are some of the responsibilities and the tasks that individuals within that group can play just to help. Or you may just have job descriptions for the folks who are playing leadership roles within the team, if it's a larger group or a larger team. Is there anything you would add to that, Natalie, before we
Yeah,
close?
the only thing I'll add quickly, and I see we have a few more questions and only a little bit of time left, so I'll answer it quickly, is that when you build that team document, and we actually have a free resource on building teams, and that has that editable chart that I'll put if you follow us on LinkedIn, you'll get it. So I can put our LinkedIn in here, and then also we have a QR code that's in your participant packet. But it's a chart that goes through the roles and the responsibilities and the people. And I actually prefer that to a job description because it's communal and the responsibility is to one another, and not this idea of just you and me signing a job description and some sort of contract. But there's this shared document that we've all said yes to. And I think that's more theologically aligned with what the church is called to do, is to make a commitment to one another, not just this like contract form. So I agree, it feels a little corporate. I still think you can have systems that support accountability without it being this quote job description. We have another idea. It was about the commitment, having to sign. Are you saying, Amanda, that the thing that felt corporate is the signing the commitment necessarily? Yes. Okay. Yes, exactly. Yes. I think, yes. So here's another question, which is, our presiding bishop, Sean Rowe, sat on the task force for reimagining the Episcopal Church, TREC. isn't reimagining innovation somehow somewhat the same process? What does Bishop Sean say about innovation, and what does he say about how to apply processes that fit the needs of individual churches? What does this say about ego and relinquishing control and some trust for a team? Yes, 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 Bob Henry, preach. Yes. I mean, one of the things that I say often when we're working with teams is that if you're not a little nervous, you haven't relinquished enough control, right? And as a leader, that if you have complete control of the situation, then you're actually not doing any leadership development, and you're definitely not, quote, leaving room for the spirit, right? So, completely that a lot of what we're talking about in terms of rethinking the needs of the church and rebuilding teams is letting go of ego, and then the delegation of it is, and me too, I'm in my 40s, but I came to the Episcopal Church in my 20s. That's more than almost half my life as an Episcopalian. And there are things that I am letting go of, right? Even me, and at this age. And so all of us are invited into this really holy work of letting go. And what we know is that the work that we've done before is really the fertilizer, or the helping the soil grow and to the plant the things that are going to be coming. So it's not like binary, right? It's an ongoing process of dying and then rising again.
Two
And
quick,
speak, yeah.
oh, go ahead.
No, you go first. Yeah, I'm going to put this link in the chat for
There
them too.
is
Yeah.
a great note by Krista, who speaks to the mindset shift that her volunteers have had around volunteer teams, where it's really about people serving. And, my words, not yours, but I'm sure you would agree, volunteering on a team is an opportunity for discipleship. It's an opportunity for us to learn biblical principles of what it means to serve. It's an opportunity for us to lean into how we listen to the prompts of the Holy Spirit. It's an opportunity for us to practice being the true body of Christ and navigating conflict and challenge while we're the hand and we're trying to interact with the foot, and the foot don't want to go nowhere. So, I love that mind shift around just being on a volunteer team itself is an opportunity for discipleship.
Speaking of corporate goals, metrics, rubrics for events, this seems a new idea into our congregation. How do we introduce those? There are many ways. So I hope I say this right, Charlene. I'm sharing that my own, points on that. There are many ways to introduce those, but I always introduce this kind of work in the context of accountability and trust, right? So in the church, we're building a sense of trust and reliance in one another and accountability. And when you have something written down, it allows us to be accountable to that and not to what we thought of. And also, this can happen a lot in the church, that if we're accountable to a person, like if we're always accountable to what the presbyter or the priest wants to do, or the bishop wants to do, or the charismatic parishioner wants to do, then when that person leaves, or when that person falls from grace for some reason, then the team can dissolve and the ministry can dissolve. And so when we can really root the teams into a vision of the priorities of the church, and into the mission of the church, then that accountability can really hold us throughout shifts and departures of staff members. So I would introduce it in the value of accountability, and I would introduce it in the context of longevity and trust, and that's really the goal behind that. It's about stewarding the church well, and not letting it get overly focused on people, but really on principles.
And I think biblically, the Bible talks about in his heart, the man can create the plans, but God is the one who ultimately determines the increase. And so it's nothing wrong with us having prayerfully and thoughtful plans as a collective team, but then trusting God for the results. And so those are all ways that you can introduce and talk about the connection of faith within the context of having goals and measuring impact within your ministries.
There's a great story in Exodus where Moses' father-in-law says to him, Moses is sitting on a chair and all these men are coming up to, I'm assuming men, because that's the world we were living in, were coming up to ask him for advice. And his father-in-law, Jethro, said, are you just going to sit in this chair all day and answer all these questions? You need to build a team, right? And so I love that for team building, if you're looking for your biblical reflections on it. And also in Acts, when they start ordaining deacons, right? Is that there were people who were presbyters and there were people who were doing the mission work. And so as you're, again, I think we would really encourage starting back at the beginning, what we said of making sure you're really clear on what are the priorities of my church and my ministry right now. We need to grow members. We need to be connected to a new constituency in the community. We need to strengthen our justice witness. We need to raise money, like whatever these things are. We need to go deeper in biblical formation. And when we really start with those things, then we can start doing this whole process of, okay, we've started with the priorities. Now let's get clear about the team statements. Then we can do roles. Then we can think about who to recruit. But if you start in the middle, it is a little jumbly because a lot of times you're starting with who the people are that are already involved. And so if you don't have priorities, we are a proponent of starting there and making sure those are aligned with the mission of the church, and then using that sort of scriptural and theological basis for moving through the reimagination that was talked about by Bob, the reimagination and the innovation and the restructuring that needs to happen. Have any yes, so I think we're wrapping up. It's 3:56. If you have any other questions, please put them in the chat. We'll get to them. You can follow us on LinkedIn. Right now, we're doing a series on org redesign. So tips for really going through an org redesign well. We put things out multiple times a week. And we'd love to stay in touch with you. So please, do not be a stranger, be a friend. And Jim, I see your question too. Oh, Leadership Development Committee.
At the bottom of the participant packet, there's a way to connect with us. So
Yes.
Feel free to click that link and we're happy to have a, broader conversation.
Yes. And Amanda, if you follow us on LinkedIn, I'll have your account. If you don't have LinkedIn, you can email that email that's on the participant guide, info@buildingformission.com, and we will send you this team resource that we have. It's a Word document that goes through the steps of forming a team. So yes. And that has most of the best practices in there. I saw that people asked for the slides. The content is really in that guide. So thank you, everyone. And thank you for the Episcopal Parish Network for putting this together. We're really honored to be here with you. And really, we're just praying for each of you, really grateful to spend the time with you today and look forward to being in touch in different avenues. And that's it. Bye.